Pinkerton's Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre Terre. It is not intended for children.
I considered not even making this report, Control. It was not an assigned mission, and I came out of it all right, physically anyway. But I have a duty. I cannot shirk it. Okay, so Violet had to go back to Massachusetts, and we decided to go somewhere nice. Since she was visiting and we were going out anyway, she agreed to go with me when I made a quick pit stop at a specialist to check out my left eye. After the events transcribed in Crossroads of the Revolution, I had lost all sight in the eye and it was scarring up. I had to check in with a doctor every few weeks just to make sure everything was filling in properly. In theory, the whole checkup wouldn't take more than 5 minutes, but, doctors. I told her to count on a half-hour minimum, but she was nice enough to say she didn't really mind. The doctor was at a small clinic in Washington, New Jersey. Since the appointment was at 2 o'clock, Violet and I were able to stop for Mass first at the Blue Army Shrine to Our Lady of Fatima in Asbury, New Jersey, a town that was close by. Beautiful place, daily Mass, daily confession. I got Violet a nice rosary that we got blessed by the priest after Mass. So listen, you need to know something. I wasn't expecting anything. This wasn't a case. This was in my hometown. There was no client, no mystery. My detective radar wasn't turned on. I'm not like Jack, I'm not constantly paranoid, the creatures of the Outre Terre ready to strike out at me at any given second. My brain just isn't wired that way. Though after this, well, I'm getting there. In retrospect, there were weird things. Like the fact that everyone was reading a magazine silently in the waiting room. I'm just grateful that they didn't turn the page as one. Not that I remember them turning the pages at all. At the time, I knew something about the room felt odd, but looking back on it, I think that was it. Not a single person had their phones out. Let's see. Next thing. I guess the next weird thing is how quickly we were let in. I had called ahead, and they knew me. But almost immediately after I walked through the door, the receptionist sitting at the desk called out my name. In retrospect, she couldn't have known, not normally anyway, I'd even arrived. But she reacted as soon as I walked into the foyer off the side of her little office window. At the time, I thought it was just unusually fast. I had been punctual before, but now I can tell it was weird. Violet sat in the waiting room. I saw her take out her new rosary out of the corner of my eye when I followed the nurse over to the doctor's office. It made me happy to see it. The nurse kept looking down the clipboard the whole time. She stayed quiet on the walk over to the room, then gestured me in without looking up. I was just happy to be let in so quickly and happy to be hanging out with Violet. I didn't want to spend more time thinking about my eye more than I had to. Inside the patient room was one of those recliners they use for patients who need to lie down, and a regular chair with armrests. The nurse gestured me to the chair. "Sit, sir. The doctor will be with you in a moment." I sat down, and the nurse walked out without another word. Weird. Maybe they were backed up today? Obvious. All of these red flags, so obvious in retrospect. And I'm supposed to be a professional. It was just a minute or so before the doctor came in. Like the nurse before her, she had her head buried in a clipboard. Unlike the nurse, I felt the hair on my skin stand up when she walked in. I looked at her a little closer. She was wearing one of those hats from the 1940s or thereabouts. You know the type. White, red cross on the front of it. She was also wearing a white dress? I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen a female doctor wear a dress. I asked her on reflex, "Where's Dr. Jacobson?" I couldn't see her face behind the clipboard she held in front of it, but she had luxurious black hair spilling out from under her hat. Strangely familiar black hair? It dawned on me with a sudden horror at the exact same moment the doctor lowered her clipboard and snapped her fingers. Before I could even think to move, draw a weapon, or anything like that, chains sprang up around the chair, wrapping my arms and torso. I made to yell, but a gag wrapped its way around my mouth, nearly choking me. I struggled, but as I writhed, the chains tightened until they hurt. Morgana Le Fay, my first and most powerful enemy, smiled at me. Sean Russo. It's been a while, hasn't it? Well, since I've seen you, anyway. Though I believe you've seen me since Shipton, haven't you, sweetie? By the way, thanks for that. I'm flattered to have shown up in your fantasies. As she talked, she removed her old-fashioned hat, letting her long, luscious black hair cascade down her neck. I ignored the pain of the chains. I squirmed and shifted, trying desperately to escape, but she had got me good. I was a rat in a trap. It was a shameful moment. Jack, Jim, old Tom, it didn't matter. Professionals aren't supposed to get caught this easily. Damn it! She purred. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. But first... She casually reached over towards me, a large pair of scissors in hand, and for a crazy second I thought she was going to stab me. But no, she simply snipped off the crucifix hanging around my neck. We can't have this getting in the way of our fun, now can we? This was my last line of protection. She smiled at me. Now, to business. This has all been a ball, Sean Russo, but I'm tired of the little game. You exceeded expectations in rescuing Celia Merrick, but the truth is you were never really anything more than it to me. A bug. Someone who was nothing more than a barely noticed annoyance, but could occasionally be surprisingly hard to crush. Until you put your mind to it. Really, it wasn't even that hard. What would old Tom say if he saw you now? I felt my face turn red in spite of myself. Morgana had a way of getting under your skin. Morgana held up her big pair of scissors again. She smiled a poison-sweet smile, then grabbed my clenched fist. Her grip was surprisingly vice-like, and against my will, my hand opened. She waved the scissors in front of my face. First order of business. The Ring of Dispel is mine, Sean Russo. It's time I took it back. I rattled the chair and squirmed with all my might, but it was completely futile. Morgana was clearly enjoying the theatrics and laughed. Look at you, how pathetic you are. Some paranormal Pinkerton. Despite my struggling, she set the ring finger of my left hand between her scissor blades. Before she could close the blades, the door burst open. I felt my heart drop even more. Violet was standing in the doorway. I wanted to shout at her, run, get away, but I couldn't make a sound through my gag. But something strange was going on. I thought Morgana would lunge at her, or perhaps start laughing, but instead she narrowed her eyes, and I saw her tense up ever so slightly. Violet, for her part, was shaking slightly, but she held out her rosary in front of her like a ward. Get your hands off him, you hussy! Violet yelled, a slight waver in her voice. Still, you had to admire the brashness of it. If Morgana was wary of her, she hid it quickly. She smiled. Ah, I know you. Oh, yes. You must be the famous Violet Hunter. I know all about you. She took a single step forward, but to her eternal credit, Violet held her ground. You... I know you too. Sean told me all about you. You're Morgana Le Fay, aren't you? You put a spell on these people. Morgana laughed. Look at that, Sean Russo. Your girlfriend figured it out before you did. Impressive work, girl. Now tell me, what is it you're holding in your hand? I saw the grip on her rosary grow tighter. It's a rosary, blessed by a priest. I see. Have you by chance prayed with it yet? she layered on something to her voice. It was thick, deep, in all womanly ways. I don't know if you've ever seen a cat trying to charm a bird down from the trees, but it was like that. Predatory, but hitting all the right notes. Violet blinked, confused. A decade. Morgana laughed again. Ah, just a decade then. Foolish girl. A half-grade rosary's a worthless trinket to the likes of me. Drop the bauble and maybe I'll let you leave alive. This was nonsense. A popular devotion like the rosary didn't pop into existence only after it was prayed with, and Macree's blessing was present whether Violet completed a full run-through of it or not. Morgana was bluffing, but she sounded convincing. For a second I was worried Violet would believe her, and her grip perhaps loosened by a touch, but she shook her head as if to clear cobwebs. No, you're lying. Let Sean go, or... Quick as a flash, when she saw her ruse didn't work, Morgana changed tactics. It's Sean you're concerned with, really? Frankly, I'm surprised you two are still together after the incident in the Control rescue mission. Morgana's voice had a layer of magic to it that added a level of persuasion. It wasn't extraordinarily powerful or anything, but I could see Violet get confused. Also, and I hate to admit this, I was a little ashamed of this myself. Incident? What incident are you talking about? Morgana looked at me with genuine confusion on her face, then started laughing loudly. Oh, my poor dear. He didn't tell you, did he? Violet turned to look at me, looking more and more suspicious. Tell me, what? Have you ever heard of a homunculus girl? Probably not. I suppose it's no surprise Shawnee boy here didn't tell you about it. Considering. I wanted to explain, to tell Violet what had happened and justify myself, but the gag kept me from speaking. Violet was looking more and more suspicious, succumbing to the power of Morgana's words, and I was helpless to do anything about it as Morgana walked closer to Violet. It was hypnotic and slow. Her body language was open, but the danger grew as she got closer. Let me enlighten you, dear. Shawnee boy was confronted with a little creature called a homunculus, a shapeshifter, that transforms itself to suit your desires. Do you know what it turned into? Violet's eyes grew wider and glassier. No? Well, you, of course, dear, knew it as the day you were born. A good Catholic boy like Sean, I imagine he had to use his imagination, but I assure you that would have been no issue. Violet looked at me, betrayal and humiliation in her eyes. In spite of myself, I turned my gaze away. Really? But Sean would never. Oh, like I said, he would have to use his imagination. But he is a man, after all. What do you think they're like, really, deep down? You think Sean Russo is as pure as the driven snow? Don't make me laugh. And really, it's worse even than that. Morgana had gotten inches away from Violet. She stood behind her, hands hovering just next to her body. Violet was almost completely enraptured. What? Worse? Do you think it was just you he saw in that homunculus? Of course not. He saw his ex-wife, the beautiful Cynthia. He saw me. His fantasies became reality in that homunculus. Beautiful nude women willing to do whatever he wanted. And you didn't know it all, did you? You poor thing, betrayed. But isn't that just like men? Tears welled up in Violet's eyes. Her hand shook so hard the beads were rattling. She wasn't even holding it up at Morgana anymore. Morgana was whispering in Violet's ear now. You understand the truth now. Good Catholic boys don't exist, do they? That rosary you hold in your hands. The purity it represents. It's all a lie, my dear. But you already knew that, didn't you? I wanted to yell at Violet to stop, not to listen, but I was useless. just a hopeless mockery of a paranormal Pinkerton agent, and Morgana was right. I couldn't call myself a good Catholic either. I only hoped Violet ran instead of dropping the rosary. Violet turned slowly to Morgana. I was betrayed by Sean. Morgana's smile was sly but triumphant. She was speaking in a loud stage whisper. Exactly. The bauble you hold represents a lie. Drop it. Violet looked forward, confused. A lie. Then she seemed to come to a decision. I'll hear it from him over the likes of a witch like you. In a single swift motion, she reached out with the rosary to Morgana's face. I couldn't see her face then, but her body tensed and straightened. My heart leapt for a moment, but Morgana hadn't entirely dropped her guard. Quick as a flash, she leapt back, and Violet's outstretched hand barely missed her face. With a single fluid motion, she whipped her scissors towards Violet's head. I screamed through my gag, but Violet barely managed to dodge, collapsing against the countertop, knocking over tongue depressors and a cutaway of a skull. That's when something strange happened. The scissors that missed Violet ripped off a chunk of her hair as they flew past, and Morgana screamed in pain, even as Violet fell away from her. It took me a second to process what had just occurred. Violet had held her rosary in front of her when she ducked. The scissors had not only gotten a small piece of her hair, but also a chunk of the beads in her hands. The string holding them on snapped, and the beads flew out of Violet's hands. Morgana's hand and arm were struck by the beads, and I could see her spasm, like she had been shocked by a taser. Suddenly, my bonds loosened. The ring of disbell had kept me from feeling the effects of Morgana's voice, but I saw the cobwebs clear from Violet's face. She blinked in confusion. What? Why? I grabbed her hand. Together we sprinted out of the building as Morgana screamed and ranted behind us, but not, for once, directed at me. You wretched whore! We're not through here, Violet Hunter. If you're foolish enough to stay anywhere near that worthless man, you'll regret it for the rest of your short, miserable life. I made sure Violet didn't stop moving, but I could see her turn out of the corner of my eye. We got to my car and hightailed it out of there. She was shaking like a leaf. She couldn't catch her breath. After we got a few miles out, I pulled over. Violet. Violet turned to look at me. There were tears in her eyes. That homunculus, Sean. Was the Klunge telling the truth? I'd never heard her use that word before, but the tone made its meaning clear enough. She was talking about Morgana. Again, I felt my face turn red. Look, Violet, she was trying to upset... Was she telling the truth? Her voice cracked as she yelled the question a second time. I sighed. I wasn't facing this like a man. I steeled myself and told the truth. The way a homunculus works. It preys on your unconscious desires. You don't control them. You don't tell them how to look. It sees your preferences and molds itself accordingly. But Violet, I took her hand. She didn't pull away, which was encouraging. I didn't do anything with the homunculus. Violet sighed. I believe you. But why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to upset you. Violet leaned back in her chair. The truth is, I guess I know why I really felt betrayed. She looked at me and gave a rueful smile. You're not a good Catholic boy? Like I can tell. I wasn't exactly the model Catholic schoolgirl growing up. I was barely Catholic when you met me. The truth is, you're the only reason I take any of this stuff seriously anymore. I didn't know what to say to this. Violet. She turned away for a moment, her face red. I got the sense she didn't want to talk about it, and this wasn't the time to pry. Let's get something to eat, Sean. I'm starving. Excellent. Oh, I hope you're a fan of chain restaurants, 'cause I'm flat broke. She smiled. You're trying to sweet-talk me, Russo. And that was that. I considered not even saying anything, but, well... You noticed, too, didn't you, Control, the real significance of what happened here? Morgana got a piece of Violet's hair. This is the second time some shadowy person or organization got or tried to get a hold of her hair. I don't know what she can do with it, but witches have all sorts of options with locks of hair. And now Violet is on Morgana's radar. What could it mean? I don't know, but I promise you this. From now on, I'm watching Morgana like a hawk. I'm never going to get cut out like that ever again, and that's a promise. For my sake, and Violet's. Sean Russo, signing off. For now.
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Anthony Marchetta and is performed by the same. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Kid Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhost, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.